Socialism has been one of the most debated ideologies throughout history. On paper, it promises equality, social justice, and an economic system where everyone has access to essential resources. However, when implemented, the results have been repeatedly catastrophic. This ideology appeals to the human desire for equity and justice, but its flaws are evident in practice. The appeal of socialism lies in its ability to resonate emotionally with people. In a world where inequality is palpable, the idea of redistributing wealth and guaranteeing universal access to basic services seems like an ideal solution. However, there is a fundamental disconnect between its ideals and its real-world application. Countries like Sweden and Denmark are often cited as success stories, but this is misleading. These nations are not socialist in the classical sense. Rather, they are market economies with high taxes to fund a robust welfare state. Private property and competition remain fundamental to their economic systems. From an economic perspective, one of socialism's main problems is the lack of incentives. In a system where individual effort is not tied to rewards, productivity tends to decrease. This phenomenon is known in economics as the tragedy of the commons, where collective ownership of resources leads to overuse or inefficiency. In the Soviet Union, for example, collective farms resulted in insufficient agricultural output and poor quality products. Farmers, unable to directly benefit from their efforts, had little motivation to improve productivity. This led to recurring food shortages and reliance on imports, even in a country with vast agricultural lands. The situation worsened because central planners prioritized political goals over actual needs, wasting resources and causing widespread dissatisfaction among workers. Another critical issue is socialism's inability to use the price system as a mechanism for information. In a market economy, prices reflect supply and demand, guiding producers on what to produce and in what quantity. In socialism, by eliminating the market, central planners lack precise data to allocate resources efficiently. During the Great Leap Forward in China, Mao Zedong implemented policies that forced farmers to produce steel instead of food. The absence of a price system to indicate true economic needs led to the conversion of farmland into poorly planned industrial projects. This contributed to one of the deadliest famines in history, where between 15 and 45 million people died. The disaster not only highlighted the inefficiency of centralized control, but also the dangers of ignoring basic supply and demand dynamics. Socialism also faces insurmountable challenges related to innovation. Joseph Schumpeter, in his theory of creative destruction, emphasizes that economic progress depends on competition and innovation. In socialist systems where there is no real competition or incentives to innovate, the economy stagnates. A clear example was the technological lag of the Soviet Union compared to Western nations during the Cold War. While the United States developed advances such as computing and telecommunications, the Soviet bloc struggled to keep up. This technological lag limited its ability to compete economically and militarily, contributing to its eventual collapse. Another economic aspect is socialism's tendency to create inefficient state monopolies. Instead of fostering competition, socialism concentrates economic power in the hands of the state, often resulting in corruption and lack of accountability. In Venezuela, for example, the nationalization of the oil industry under Hugo Chavez led to a drastic drop in production due to mismanagement and corruption. According to OPEC data, Venezuela's oil production fell from 3.5 million barrels per day in 1998 to less than 1 million in 2020, despite having the world's largest proven crude reserves. This not only devastated the country's economy, but also left millions of citizens in extreme poverty, dependent on international aid. The concentration of power in socialist systems affects not only the economy, but also individual freedoms. Friedrich Hayek, in his work The Road to Serfdom, argues that state control of the economy inevitably leads to the loss of political freedoms. This was evident in the Soviet Union, where power centralization led to the repression of dissent and the totalitarian control of society. Citizens were constantly monitored, and any criticism of the regime could result in imprisonment or worse. The absence of an independent judiciary and a free press allowed the Soviet government to operate without restrictions, resulting in massive human rights abuses. History offers numerous examples of socialism's failure. Venezuela is one of the most recent cases. Despite having the world's largest oil reserves, the socialist policies implemented by Hugo Chavez and continued by Nicolas Maduro led the country into an unprecedented humanitarian crisis. Massive nationalizations, price controls, and disastrous economic management caused hyperinflation, food shortages, and a massive exodus of citizens. According to International Monetary Fund figures, inflation in Venezuela reached an astounding 10 million% in 2019, rendering the local currency practically useless. The crisis also exposed how the lack of economic diversification, typical of socialist systems, can lead to collapse when a key sector fails. North Korea is another example of how socialism can push an economy to the brink of collapse. While its southern neighbor thrives under a capitalist system, North Korea faces extreme poverty, political repression, and a stagnant economy. United Nations reports indicate that over 40% of the North Korean population suffers from chronic food insecurity, a problem exacerbated by the lack of international trade and failed self-sufficiency policies. Furthermore, the North Korean government prioritizes military spending over the welfare of its citizens, worsening the humanitarian crisis. East Germany also serves as an illustrative case. Under socialist rule, its economy could not compete with that of West Germany. Despite being subsidized by the Soviet Union, it suffered from low productivity, shortages, and a much lower quality of life. This drove millions of people to attempt to escape to the other side of the Berlin Wall, demonstrating how socialist policies often alienate their own citizens. By 1989, before the fall of the wall, West Germany's per capita GDP was more than double that of East Germany, a disparity that underscored socialism's economic consequences. Even after reunification, the former East German territories faced decades of economic lag compared to their Western counterparts. In addition to these examples, Zimbabwe under Robert Mugabe illustrates the dangers of socialist policies. Land redistribution reforms, initially aimed at achieving social justice, led to the collapse of the agricultural sector, which in turn caused hyperinflation and a widespread economic collapse. In 2008, inflation reached 79,600,000,000%, wiping out the savings of millions of citizens and leaving the country dependent on international aid. Zimbabwe's collapse showed how policies designed to correct historical inequalities can have devastating consequences when implemented without considering economic realities. It is also important to debunk the myth of successful socialist countries. Sweden, Norway, and Denmark are often cited as examples, but these nations operate under market economies with strong welfare states. Private property, free enterprise, and competition are fundamental to their success. Moreover, these countries have low levels of corruption and a high degree of transparency, factors that starkly contrast with traditional socialist regimes. According to the 2023 Index of Economic Freedom, these countries rank among the world's freest economies, reinforcing the idea that their success is not attributable to socialism. Socialism attracts people with its promises of equality and justice, but fails because it ignores human nature, eliminates incentives, concentrates power, and leads to economic inefficiency. History has repeatedly shown that socialist systems end up creating poverty, repression, and inequality. While the desire to create a more equitable society is commendable, the data and facts make it clear that socialism is not the way to achieve it. The solution lies in finding a balance that combines economic freedom with an effective social safety net, something only market economies have achieved so far. This balance allows societies to harness the efficiency and dynamism of capitalism with the social justice of a well-designed welfare state. In this way, we can build a society that is not only fairer, but also sustainable and prosperous. The key is to foster systems that encourage innovation and competition, while protecting the most vulnerable, creating real opportunities for everyone.